Please welcome Executive Chairman and Co-founder, Axonius, Dean Sysman.
All right, great to see everybody. I'm sure everybody is full of energy. I can't wait to hear another conversation about AI and security, but that's why we're here today. And I have a very interesting thing to talk about, which is actionability and what that actually means and why it ties back so deeply to our fundamentals. So I want to talk about a dream, not my dream, but everybody's dream. The perfect cybersecurity world. What is that? It's a place where all of our environments are self-healing. They take care of themselves, they secure themselves, they do everything for us. Isn't that the fantasy that we have when we run OpenClaw and make them, do all these things for us? Well, what do we need to do to get there? What actually happens in a self-healing environment is that we go from the stage of understanding what the security should be, right? We declare it. We actually define in our environment, in the area that we're responsible for, every single granular level of what our security policy is. And then as the nature of reality is, there are changes and there is drift from that declaration. We need to detect that drift and understand where it happened and why it happened. And then we need to decide how we close that gap. And then we need to take the action to do that. And while we're constantly focused about action, actually the most important part to get there is the lead up of the understanding of the decision that comes from that drift, from that declaration that we had. And actually, we're not far from a future or that fantasy of a self-healing environment. We just need to understand how do we implement that in a world that's constantly evolving and changing and is becoming an AI-first world. So what do these really mean in our day-to-day today, right? It's defining those policies, is using our control, using our technology, understanding the risk of the drift that we are experiencing, and then not only taking the action to fix those, but actually validating and measuring that continuously. And in order to do that, sounds easy enough, right? We all know that's not easy. The fundamentals are not basic. They're very deep. And they go down to the most tactical level, like every single configuration, like every single vulnerability, like every single control that every endpoint should have. But they also go very high in how we're fitting our risk model, how we're looking at our threat actors, how we're looking at our resiliency to change and risk. And they are very easy to declare, but if for a second we'll think about them, they are very hard to prove. The drift from our declaration is challenging. It's very easy to write in a document that every Windows endpoint should have our EDR agent on it, but how do we validate that, right? We need to understand every single Windows device. We need to go through the fact that that agent is installed. We need to go through the fact that it's updated, that it's configured the right way. And that information is in many different places in order to get to the understanding of that drift, even before we make the decision of what change we make. And we wanted to show you a lot of data that Axonius has seen in the market and in the environment from billions of assets and millions of networks and thousands of organizations. And the median organization that we have has almost 300,000 different devices. And yet, that simple example of do we have even the proper agent of our policy on that specific device, almost 13% of devices on average are missing that agent. And if you look at the examples of what are those missing agents, we are talking about the most common and most critical technologies that we know in our industry. from the security side, from the IT side, from the networking perspective as well. And if this wasn't hard enough, obviously things are changing a lot because of AI and because of the increasingly deep adoption of technology in every single organization in the world. We are seeing the acceleration of the velocity of changes, right? If a vulnerability used to be exploited in weeks, now it's exploited in minutes from being reported and publicized and patched. We now have much more compound relationships in our environment, from AI talking to each other, AI talking to humans, and humans interacting with AI. Our asset types have completely multiplied, from what kind of identities we have, what kind of devices we have, what kind of applications, and what kind of data we have. And obviously, all of that needs to be tied back to ownership in our organization through the identities of all those things. And if we think about it as an industry and as a practitioner community, we've always looked at cybersecurity through two different lenses, right? We have the deterministic lens, where we look at systems and compute and storage and memory, and those things behave in a way that we can determine, we can forecast, we can understand, and we can react to or respond to in a deterministic way as well. And yet we have people who are probabilistic. Nobody ever knows what somebody is going to do or how they're going to act or what kind of risks they're going to introduce. And we need to treat that with that mentality in a very different way. But with AI, what we're seeing is that actually AI is both of those things. From a systems perspective, the access, the compute, the networking, all the elements that operate and run AI are deterministic, and they present their own security challenges. But from a behavioral standpoint, we actually need to treat AI just like we did for people. They are probabilistic, and we do not know or forecast their behavior or their actions. So what does actionability really mean? What it means is empowerment for every practitioner, every leader, every IT and security person. And how do we do that? How do we achieve that? By understanding how we go from visibility to actionability. Like we talked about those self-filling environments, that fantasy of us not needing to do any work and just letting technology take care of its own security. We need to start by seeing what we have, right? What exists in our environment. Then there's this understanding of the organizational context of those things. We can't fix everything, and we don't have unlimited resources, so there's always an element of prioritizing. What do we care about more than others? Then the biggest question, that is the hardest one to answer today: who owns this? Who will make this decision? Who needs to be accountable for the action and the decision that needs to be taken? And obviously, what is that thing that needs to be fixed? And how do we validate and continue to report on that? And if this was hard from a human perspective up until now, layer on the AI part of this equation. And the thing holding us back from being able to achieve this is fragmentation. There is not one single technological environment that only uses one vendor. We use a multitude of tools, and the number of tools and the number of vendors and the number of products in every environment is increasing. Today it's in the dozens, and in many environments we see hundreds of different tools that all tell a very different story about the environment. There is the identity view, there is the cloud view, there is the endpoint view, there is the network view, and each one of those even have many different views and different tools in and of themselves. And these are example numbers of trying to understand even what is in the environment and getting very different answers. Knowing is half the battle, but only knowing half is a pretty effed up battle in its own. So again, if we go back to the data and we understand what's really happening now out there, when we asked and looked at environments and leaders, how are you doing in order to get a singular view and a single understanding of your assets? First of all, the majority of them do not even have any unified view of their environment. They try and understand what the puzzle is by looking at one piece at a time. The ones who do try and get a unified environment, the majority of them still do that in spreadsheets. And I'm sure many of you in your junior entry roles into cybersecurity might have done that and are really happy that you don't have that job anymore. Because the stare and compare in spreadsheets, we all know, is irrelevant by the time you've already done it. And if we think about how fast this is and how much velocity matters, almost none of them do this on a daily basis. So the most up-to-date version they have is at least a few days old. The other thing that we've seen is that we now not only have fragmentation of visibility, we have fragmentation of risk. If we used to have one source of where we got our exposures, where now vulnerabilities are not the only risk that we also have other kinds of risks that we call exposures, misconfigurations, improper access, exposure to the internet. All those things are relevant to the risk of an asset. And now, in the average organization, we have more than 5 different sources of exposure data, right? From all these different known tools, these are the most common sources that we see in the market. And if we need to understand our risk and prioritize and make the decision of how to fix, obviously, this is another element of fragmentation that is preventing us from being able to do that. And if we go and look at how do we reconcile that and what people have done in the market, we ask them, what's your biggest challenge in being able to remediate exposures? We see that 26% answer is, I can't prioritize. I don't know how to do that. The next one, almost just as big, is I don't know who is the owner of fixing that, right? We talked about the dream of the self-filling environment and those 4 layers to doing that, right? The ownership of who makes that decision, who owns that action, and the fix. And the last one, the 21% that we keep talking about, is the inconsistency of data. When a crime happens and an investigator is trying to understand what happened, they don't just talk to one witness and they don't just look at one piece of evidence. There is always noise when you're trying to understand the truth and understand reality. And talking to as many witnesses and collecting as many pieces of evidence and seeing the overlap between them is the only way to get to the truth. And today, organizations have so many different views and so many different data points that they conflict each other and prevent us from understanding the truth. Now, if you're into racing and somebody let you drive this beautiful Ferrari, which I think is real and not AI generated, but the windshield would be cracked or you would be blindfolded, right? It doesn't matter how fast the car is. If we cannot see where we're going or if we cannot control the way we travel there, it's not safe and we don't want to do that. So how do we change that and make that use of all of this technology that we have today and into the future, right? The answer is we have to be able to reconcile the context of all this fragmented data views and all this fragmented understanding of our environment and how to get to that fantasy, right? And that means that it's not just the security data that we need to understand. It's not just the asset data. It's also the business context of all those things. So how do we get to that perfect world? With the fundamentals, just like we had talked about so far. And when we think about those fundamentals, again, we have to really go down to the lowest granularity level and then build that up. And that document that your CISO has written and shared with the board that says, what is our policy for how we secure our environment? That document that lives in natural language needs to be implemented, detected, validated, in order to be able to see the drift from it and be able to make the decisions and take the action that gets us back into that declared state. And if you think about it, every single part of that policy, every single declaration there involves all the different dimensions of our environment, right? If I want every endpoint to have the EDR agent on it, I need to check all the different states of both the network and the cloud and the endpoint status. The same if I want every app to be behind single sign-on, and the same if I want every single record to be in my CMDB. And this goes on for every single part of what my declaration of what my security needs to be. So what is durable context that serves the AI era to get us there, right? It's the multiplication of should and is. And we need to have the ability to take all that fragmented data, take all those fragmented views, and just like that crime scene investigator, be able to correlate them together and get down to the truth. And now with AI, this is even more critical because humans are really good at stopping when they're going to do something incredibly wrong or dangerous. I have not seen any security practitioner say that if their boss says to reduce the storage use, they should just delete our database. But AI agents can and do that. The risk of the wrong action becomes exponentially higher unless you have the right durable context. So going back to that dream, we need to have the strongest fundamentals. We need to take our declaration of what we want our environment to be and how secure it is, and we need to be able to track that. We need to cut through the fragmentation. We need to have the ability to merge all those different dimensions of our environment. That is the only way to lead us to understanding the drift from that declaration, and then most importantly, the steps that get us to reconciliation. The understanding of who is the owner of that decision, the ability to make that decision by having all the organizational context that allows us to understand the implications of that decision. Then choosing what tool or what controls are going to take that action. And then, really importantly, validating that it actually happened the right way and reporting on that. And that's what we mean when we say actionability. Creating the foundations to be able to go through that loop that we all think of as the fantasy of a self-filling environment. From declaration to the visibility of understanding the gaps, to the context that allows us to understand ownership and the decision, culminating in being able to take the action that gets us back to where we're secure. Thank you.